Welcome to ESG in Practice, where we turn environmental, social, and governance topics into practical, actionable steps.
I'm Anne, your guide to data-driven sustainability insights.
And I'm Abby, with 2 decades of hands-on experience in this field.
Together with our guests, we're unraveling the complexities of ESG, where we move the discussion away from glossary reporting
to make sustainability and compliance a real competitive advantage for your business.
Hello. Hi, everyone. We are here today in the studio with Sandy Spørck. Hello, Sandy.
Hello.
Welcome. Can you give us a little bit of introduction about yourself and the company you work at, PGS, what you guys do, then also maybe share a little bit about your background?
My background is like my colleagues at PGS. I'm a global citizen, but originally American-Mexican, living in Norway for more than 20 years. And I've been working in oil and gas for over 16 years and in other industries. So combined, I have more than 2 decades of experience. Most of that experience has been, as I said, in oil and gas within multiple functions at a functional level, strategy, business development across organizations, but also in operational roles and projects. I consider myself a very operational leader with experience from offshore projects, topside, subsea, modifications, maintenance type of projects. A bit technical, so that's me. In terms of PGS is a geophysical company that gathers offshore survey data and uses a vast amount of cloud compute to image the Earth. And when I started to look at PGS, I thought it was pretty cool in thinking that if you combine all the movies in the world in 4K quality, they combined are 10 petabytes. Put into perspective, one of our survey acquisition projects could range from 4 to 6 petabytes. Another way to think about it is if you have 15 million pages of standard printed text, that is just 1 petabyte. We deal a lot with data. Yeah.
Sounds like an interesting one.
It's good. Yes.
And how big is the company? It is a listed company, correct?
We're a listed company. We're about 1,000 people with 12 offices worldwide. Our headquarters are in Oslo. We have 8 active vessels. Those are the vessels that enable us to acquire all this wonderful data. Our core is still within oil and gas. The world still needs energy. That's our focus. But in 2021, we established a new energy business. And then in 2022, we entered the carbon capture market. We work with characterizing the reservoirs to understand if they're viable for capturing carbon. And then we also entered the wind market, where we characterize for the installation of the wind turbines and wind farms.
When did you join PGS, SVP of Sustainability and Quality? And why did they create this kind of role for you?
I am a newbie at PGS. I joined in January 2023. The reason why I was attracted to PGS is their vision. Their vision is to support affordable and sustainable energy for all. And that was very attractive to me because that meant that at the top level, they're focused on that. And then my next question is, okay, what are you doing about it?
Yeah.
When I started to look at what they've been doing within the sustainability space, they've been reporting on their ESG efforts since 2011. And I thought that was actually quite cool. You'd think, wow, it's a huge company and they're in oil and gas, but they were also very focused on ESG. The other element that attracted me was their culture. When PGS was established as a company more than 32 years ago, they wanted to disrupt the seismic market with 3D imaging. And that tells you a little bit about the culture, right? Yeah. They dare to challenge. And then you have a little bit of this startup mentality, which you probably know a lot. We have a lot of scientists. They're geophysicists, so they're very comfortable working with unknowns, with hypotheses, with testing. So that was very attractive to me, given where we are within sustainability, with new regulation coming our way, a lot of unknowns, a lot of uncertainty. Having an organization that dares to try new things, that was important to me.
I love that. You don't have the typical, I would say, sustainability background coming from reporting or from one of the big four focusing on sustainability. You actually come from a senior level position. You're VP of the project management in Aker Solutions. I'm curious to see that transition, and also what was the thinking of the company in bringing your technical project management role around implementation to the sustainability role?
Yeah, there's a link there. When you win a project, you have a contract, right? And you have expectations from your customers, and you also have an expectation for the company that you're working on to deliver value, to deliver the margins that are envisioned for that project. Working in subsea or offshore modifications, with new technology, there's a lot of unknowns. You have to have this mentality of, we have this framework, but we know that that framework will be challenged. So how do you adapt? So there's a lot about risk, a lot about uncertainty, and how to get the most out of your team. So you need to have a diverse team, both technical, but also from commercial side. And I could say that is very much parallel to what you need in sustainability. The same with offshore, or when you modify or maintain an asset, you don't know what you're going to find. It's like, we're going to upgrade your kitchen. The house is 30 plus years old. You don't know what you're going to find behind there, right? So it's that adaptability that I think it's important. And then the last point is, every project is supported by the work processes that the company has. Quality is very important in translating the sustainability requirements into our work processes. Because if my colleagues don't see how that is relevant to what they're doing on a day-to-day basis, it won't work.
I love how you say that, because you wouldn't naturally think about the correlation between the two, but there are a lot of similarities, because there is so much changing around the sustainability space with the regulations. There is still a lot of uncertainty on how things are going to land. And you have to be okay with playing with moving pieces, things that are changing along the way. I like what you said about the implementation, how quality is about implementing it into the process, and sustainability is about implementing the processes. And that's really what we care most about, not just about annual reporting once a year, but actually how do you work it in day to day. At PGS, what has been your focus area since you started around sustainability?
My focus area and my objective is to integrate sustainability in all we do. I have to take a step back because, again, one of the things that attracted me to PGS was the fact that they were already focused on ESG, especially on climate action, because that's what we're closest with, given our working environment. It was more about, how do we then illustrate the requirements in our work processes? How do we create a common understanding, knowing that the new regulation needs to be understood not just by me or the executive team, it needs to be understood by those that are the data owners, because they're going to help us report at a later stage, but they're also going to help us gain insights so we can make decisions. If they don't understand what's required of us and what that means within the context of PGS and the market that we work in or we operate in, it will fail. That was the main focus and the main reason for us to challenge ourselves to think differently. How are we going to integrate this? The way of the network model is very popular. Collaboration is a must. Putting those two together, we thought, well, why not create an internal sustainability network? And then the challenge was, okay, how do we do that? I interviewed all the executive team and I asked them, what does sustainability mean to you? And what do you think it means for PGS? And who should I talk to in your team that you feel may be able to represent your function and your interests as PGS? And then I reached out to those people. So we were about 33 people at the start, all on a voluntary basis. It wasn't an additional role. We did establish a role description to be clear about what was expected of us, but this had to be done as an add-on to our daily job.
And I'm curious, when you are in a company who is so rich in data and you start this network and this implementation journey towards sustainability, do you start from a data-first approach where you are first looking at what is available?
I love that question. Well, it's both a challenge, but it's also fun. If I take the Norwegian Transparency Act, which sets quite high requirements for human and labor rights, if I take that as an example, we have a lot of data, but it was about understanding what data needed to be prioritized to meet the requirements from the different stakeholders. So we have the legal aspect, we have the supply chain aspect, we have the social aspect, and then we have the reporting aspect, and then the assessment aspect from a risk perspective. That has been a challenge, but at the same time, we have a lot of the data. So it's about structuring it within the framework that we feel fits the business context of PGS and would meet the requirements for CSRD, Norwegian Transparency Act.
A lot of companies are facing this, and I think they're starting to realize, actually, we do have a lot of data in our organization, but how do we find it? How did you guys practically go and find it? Did you go through your network? Are there specific data data owners in your company?
We have data owners. In some functions, we made them aware that they were data owners. Even though they knew it, it's actually using those words to ensure that the expectation is understood. And then also understanding, okay, given the data that you see, is the quality of the data at the level that you as a subject matter expert think it's good enough? Not going to be 100%, but it's 70, 80%. Yeah. That's a good start. In PGS, we have
a lot of data.
So that wasn't the problem. It was about how much of that data do we need and where do we start? You can take all the data, but it's just going to overwhelm us.
Exactly.
We really had to use a lot of time, for example, with supply chain. Take your suppliers. We have 2,000 suppliers. Out of those, let's say, how many are strategic and important to us? 50. And those, how many have a supply chain that we need to assess from a risk perspective? It's just having that conversation and then testing the data that we have, understanding where the gaps are so we can work on closing those gaps if it makes sense.
Exactly. One of the things that's coming out of the Norwegian Transparency Act is that it's forcing companies to look at these aspects of it and create a methodology around it. And I think the first year will be more difficult, but then the other years will be a lot easier. But I'm interested about the data owners. How did you find them exactly in the organization? Did you go by function area like HR? There's a data owner in HR, finance. Is that how you found them?
Yes, it's by function area. Okay. And that's also a backbone for the sustainability network and the sustainability committee we can talk about later. But it's confirming that ownership and the role that they have, not just within their function, but for sustainability for PGS.
Yeah, and one thing is, from my experience, finding where the data sits. And then another whole thing, which in my opinion is even the more challenging one, is centralizing it in a way that it fulfills the purpose. In this case, the Norwegian Transparency Act. How is that being done at PGS? Is it you personally taking all these different sources and deciding what goes where? Or is it the whole network that is cooperating on that?
It's the whole network. Absolutely. I'm not an expert. So I rely heavily on, if we continue with the example of supply chain, meeting with them on a regular basis, working very closely with the compliance team that knows the organization quite well, knows where data sits. It's not a one-person job, and that's why it's a network. We haven't called it a network before, but it is a network. We are reliant on each other because even if data makes sense from a supply chain perspective, it may not make sense from a risk perspective or a compliance perspective. So putting our heads together, that takes time. Maybe I can use our emission and monitoring data from our vessels that has existed for as long as PGS has existed. It's quite mature. And even there, we see the need to constantly quality check the data. So being able to see the data and analyze it and query it is really, really important, and meet so that we can actually discuss it and ensure that that data is correct before it goes to the next step of providing it for decision making or for reporting.
And do you have dedicated data scientists or analysts to this project?
Yes. In PGS, we have an area called the Digital Factory, and they work with, now I'm not technical here, I'm looking at you, but it's called CDF, which is a platform that allows all data to be compiled and structured in one platform. And then with APIs, you can either share it or spit it out in different applications. That's been quite powerful. Maybe in the old days, you would think, okay, we have this application. How do we develop that, make it accessible to everybody and train everybody? Those days are gone. Now you can have everything on your BI dashboard and it comes from multiple sources. So it makes it a lot easier.
And I think it helps that your company starts with the premise of being data first. So you have the skills in-house. I think what we see in some companies, they don't have in-house data science team, or they don't have somebody that can help manage the data. I have a question about your network, because I've done similar things in my career in terms of setting up a network of volunteers throughout the organization, because then you have hands, eyes, and ears across the organization to help you with implementation. I'm curious, when you did talk to the leaders, how did you get their buy-in? Because I'll be honest, not always every leader is 100% for sustainability. They might have other priorities that are in their immediate focus area. Did you have any trouble getting buy-in around the sustainability network? Did you have to convince anyone, or was it relatively straightforward?
I thought about it at the beginning. I'm like, am I doing this right? Because it just felt so easy. Do I really have buy-in? So I'd go back and double check, but it's so engraved, and this is not marketing, because we are so close to oceans, we're so close to data. The buy-in is already there. I didn't really have to fight for it. People welcomed it. And I think there was maybe also an element of feeling that we're doing all these things, but we're not daring to talk about it because of the fear of potential backlash. Everybody was curious about, okay, how can we actually do this and feel proud about it internally? We also wanted to showcase it externally. That's more of a personal drive for the people that we've engaged, and they also see the value on it, of course.
And I think it is a way to engage the employees all across the organization, whatever level, to be involved in sustainability. And that really helps with the implementation of it. Your role also reports to the CEO, correct?
Correct.
So you do have some seniority or sway based on that. Can you share your thoughts about that in the role?
Change starts at the top. It doesn't have to, but it makes it a lot easier. When our CEO talks about sustainability and kicked off the sustainability network, then people are like, all right, our leader is saying this is important, so we're going to do it. That definitely helps.
For companies, I'm just thinking some of our listeners are maybe in sustainability or compliance roles in the middle level of the organization. They're not necessarily a few levels down from the CEO and don't have as much as that buy-in. Is there any advice you can give to them about building a network or implementing their responsibilities?
Making a network work requires leadership. You have to think about what is leadership. It requires a lot of stakeholder management. To be successful in that, it requires that you understand what your stakeholders need and why they need what they need. If you're able to understand that, I think it's easier to convince them, even though there wasn't much convincing, but challenge them to take the challenge of being part of a sustainability network, or if they weren't part of the sustainability network, supporting that, because you also need that influence across the organization.
I think that's a great point. Having worked in this sector, sometimes you're reactive in this role. There's so much that you want to do and you're convinced this is the right thing to do, but to take the time to understand where the other person is coming from and why is it important for them and how is it important for them in their role and their actual responsibilities before you try to implement something. Just having coffee chats, that was something that really changed. I was in an organization for, I think, 2 years, thinking that I knew everything about the organization. And then I took time for 30-minute coffee chats across the organization. And the amount of knowledge that I gained about what everybody was doing, new opportunities and risks, it is something that is a challenge within our industry because we're so reactive and we're trying to do things quickly or pulled into so many things that you don't have the time to sit down, but to prioritize that because it will help with the network building and people get to know you more. You also have a sustainability steering committee. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Part of my role is also to report to the board of directors of PGS. And one of our board members suggested the steering committee, which I hadn't thought about it. So that was really great. So she guided me on that subject. We thought about who are the data owners for E, S, and G, who are influential leaders that we need, both to support the network, also to challenge us. Because one key sentences we say quite often, what is the cost of doing something and what is the cost of not doing something? And you can't just look at it from a financial perspective, right? You need the social aspect of it and the customer voice and all the different perspectives. So a diverse committee was important. We established 4 deep dives within the sustainability network. We need some structure. I wasn't going to be coordinating a network of 33 people. That just wouldn't work. We decided on 4 key themes that were related to our sustainability strategy. And then we asked and assigned 4 leaders in PGS to lead that. And then we gave them the freedom to structure it the way they felt worked best for that topic. The 4 deep dive leaders then meet with the steering committee on a monthly basis, and we discuss where they're at in the deep dive. Initially, we set it up as a pilot because we didn't know what to expect from it. We wanted to try it and see if it was successful. The discussions have been, have you looked at the initiatives within that focus area or deep dive? What are you doing about it? Do you want to do something about it? What do you need? How can we help you? There's been, of course, a lot of focus on the emissions deep dive, which requires some investments. We've had a lot of discussions around that, the strategy to meet our net zero target.
You mentioned that you were able to narrow it down to 4. How did you do that? Can you talk a little bit more about that?
And what are they?
The starting point was the interviews that I had with the executive team and their nominated leaders, which I also interviewed. And I asked them, what is sustainability for you as an individual? What should sustainability be for PGS? Out of those interviews, there were 4 themes that came out of that. One was related to small actions we can take that can have greater impact. That became one deep dive. The other was about showcasing what we've done. What does sustainability mean for PGS? was another deep dive, more related to internal and external communication and defining sustainability for PGS. The third deep dive is fuel and emission efficiencies, very much related to our vessel operations. And then the last is reporting for insight and transparency, which is also quite important to report in the future. The 4 people that were selected are leaders across PGS. That was also important to get diversification, not just from headquarters. I was warned by our CEO that these 4 leaders were the most busy people in the organization. And that's funny how it works, because if you're passionate about a subject, you will make the effort. So far, it's worked well. But that's how we landed on those 4 themes in our strategy retreat in the management team. We had a discussion about how does that fit with the strategy, support it, would it challenge it? We did have, I guess you could call it a quality check. These themes, something that we want to take further. And the answer was yes. And that's how we set up the structure around the sustainability network.
Sandy, earlier you mentioned that the reason why it was so easy for you to get a buy-in from the people in your company was that you're so close to the ocean. You're so close to E, basically, in ESG. And that's where you have a lot of data, right?
Yeah.
So I'm curious, how was that compared to the S&G part of ESG? Because it's a bit more difficult to get data there. And especially when you have so much data around environmental metrics. I'm curious, how was the comparison between the 3?
The backbone is governance, as you know very well, especially look at you, Abby, with your experience. You have a lot of manual processes, but it doesn't mean the data is not there. So we have databases here and there. When it comes to social, our HR data is in a system called Cornerstone. So we have very easy access to gain insights for all of the related processes. It was more about expanding the focus from E, which we're very passionate about. But many of us that are not offshore that wanted to engage, that's where the S came in. That's how we've managed to create more engagement and give more empowerment in the different locations of PGS through the sustainability network, which also includes 4 sustainability ambassadors in different locations that have the mandate to drive social activities for the company.
We do see that with companies. There's a lot of E data, but S and G is a little bit harder to measure. S oftentimes is found in the HR system. There's sometimes it's not all found in terms of diversity metrics on that. It really depends on each individual company's HR system. And then G, like Sandy exactly said, it's an extremely manual process. And I think that's something that needs to change in order for G to be able to catch up to S and E so that it becomes a better overall picture of how you're doing around sustainability. I think that's really interesting.
From a data perspective, an opportunity is to try and understand how do we capture all the efforts we're doing in our communities. We talk about it, but it's not in any system.
Oh, I know. I've had that in previous companies too, and you're chasing people up and be like, what did you do here? Try to do this manually. And there is just so much that is happening, like you said, across the organization. And how do you actually gather it up? So also it motivates employees. If they see this is happening in one country, then they want to do it too. And then they feel better about the company as a whole and what they're doing. But I see that as a challenge and an opportunity.
And I would assume when you have, for example, so much data like PGS has on the E side, and then you have to put all ESG data in the same place, this is going to look so much to catch up to. And that maybe isn't a motivation in itself to get more data-driven around governance. Sandy, given that I'm representing the younger audience here and I got to stand up for us a little bit, I'm curious, if you didn't have all the experience working in corporates, understanding how things work, and you started your role now in sustainability, how would you have approached it?
Yes, I'm biased because I have some experience from before, but I never worked with sustainability before, new to the seismic market. So there was a lot of new things for me to learn. In one sense, I had to forget the experience that I had and try and challenge myself to think differently. My advice would be think of a structure that works for you, that you feel you have control over, because that's really important. You can only control what you have control over. Think about a framework. What helped us a lot was to look at the OECD guidelines, which are risk-based. And it really gave us that structure and challenging us. Okay, do you have your policies in place? Even if they're not perfect, are they able to support the vision that you might have for sustainability? Do you have a good strategy process and assessments that are risk-based, that you can look at the double materiality assessment, because that's a really good exercise where you're not just looking at the impact that you have externally, but also how the world impacts your business. Ensure that you understand the business context, because that will also guide you quite a lot. And then think about, how do we structure this? There is a lot of process thinking, not for it to take over, but just to have some structure, because people need structure. For example, for us, then we developed an ESG plan. So that gives us objectives for the year. And we have a net zero target to 2050, really far out. But I tell my colleagues, I don't know exactly how we're going to get there. Let's look at what we can do right now. Again, coming back to structure, if it's a plan or if it's a checklist, try and keep it very simple. And then following the OECD processes, you follow up and you adjust. So meeting with your stakeholders, having a cup of coffee every other week. I do that because that keeps the dialogues active, but also having those formal discussions in the organization. Is this working? Getting feedback from the data owners. What do they see? And just keeping an open mind that you may adjust, but try and stick to a framework. And then the last one is reporting, where you're going to see the fruits of your efforts, hopefully make you aware of your strengths and your weaknesses. And then you can go back and do this, but you can't see the circle, right? Yeah. What do you want to adjust in the OECD guidelines circle? I really like that. It provided us a good framework, which is risk-based, so it accounts for the business needs, and then it's easy to integrate the E, S, and G within that framework.
You were very lucky that you had buy-in from the stakeholders. People were quite motivated and willing to contribute. I'm assuming in your decades of experience in project management as well, not always people are going to be willing to contribute, and the buy-in is going to be slightly more difficult. In such cases, do you think that would have caused new troubles for you in this journey? Or for people facing these issues, how should they address them from someone that has had experience in management?
Well, I'm going to be very blunt. You will never get 100% buy-in.
Yeah.
So at some point, you have to make a decision and think, okay, do I have my key stakeholders with me? Even if you have a key stakeholder that is not able to come along with you now, maybe they will come later when they see fruits of the efforts of the rest of the team. And if they don't, then they're not going to come along regardless.
Yes.
That would be my advice. Don't focus on getting everybody on board. Get those that are important, that can create momentum. And if you have that one key stakeholder that you need, but it's not coming along, give it time.
I think that's one of the lessons I've learned through the career. I think when you're younger, you're like, I want to go at it and just pound the nail with the hammer. But I think the stakeholder management and engagement is just so important, especially when you're trying something new. Those coffee chats, because a lot of what you need to do, especially if you want to do sustainability or compliance right, you need to be able to reach the whole organization. In order to reach the whole organization and for people to like you or buy it, they need to get to know you and who you are. Not just somebody sitting in the corner and somebody sitting at headquarters or somebody sitting in the subsidiary. So really having the coffee chats and the meeting, trying to really understand what they do and their thoughts on it, and maybe having 15, 20 regular meetings. And at the same time, I think being okay with if somebody says, no, I don't have time to meet with you, you can move on to the next person. It's easy to get intimidated and not start, but to just reach out and talk to more and more people, because you're going to need that buy-in anyway if you want to be successful in your job. So you're going to start with a low bar and just more understanding what they're doing, talk to them and understand how this affects their business and what you see. It's a similar approach that Sandy did, because eventually you'll start to see themes in people and what they say. And then you can actually pick up on those themes. And then later on, when you actually want to present what you want to do, you can say, I've talked to 40 people. It's not just my opinion, but I've talked to across the organization, and these are the themes, and this is why. So you have a little bit more behind you and the plan that you want to be and the structure that you want to build.
The advice is collect data.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Collect data and don't take it personally if somebody doesn't want to give you their data.
Yeah, exactly.
I love that.
Perfect. Great. Should we go to the rapid fire questions?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll start with the first one. One word to describe the future of ESG.
License to operate is 3 words, though.
That's okay.
Not if you put dash.
Yeah, well, I'll put a dash.
There we go. Thank you.
Biggest misconception about ESG?
It's only there for reporting.
And your go-to metric for ESG success?
Employee engagement and behavior.
Biggest challenge in ESG implementation?
Aligning it with the business context.
Most underrated aspect of ESG?
Oh, it's a powerful tool for employee engagement.
ESG in one sentence.
Backbone for good business practice.
Why is ESG implementation more important than ESG reporting?
The value is in the implementation. I worked with strategy before. If you have a glossy PowerPoint, but nobody's doing anything about it, there's no value. And you can report on it, but again, there's no value.
Great. Sandy, thank you so much for joining us today. I was quite excited, actually. A lot of discussion around data. I love what you guys are doing and the initiatives that you're taking towards sustainability. And I hope we can stay in touch in the future as well.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you to all our listeners for your support so far. If you like this episode, we will highly appreciate you rating it 5 stars to help increase the reach of ESG in practice.
And if you want to be notified when our next episode drops, please hit the follow button.